And good morning to everybody joining us on Facebook. Happy to have you, probably in a warm, cozy place with a warm beverage. Figured today would be an appropriate service to start off with a mantra burr. If you know that mantra from ancient India, it awakens the fire within the heart. So excellent to be here amidst the tundra. We're not used to this in Florida, so hopefully it'll pass soon, even though it's nice for a change. I want to just get into a conversation this morning centered around really looking at the approach to spiritual life that would be in many ways applicable to where we are in our day and age. And so the theme, more or less, that we're going to be working with today is sort of the appearance and the reality. This is something that you get from ancient philosophers like Plato, and then you have ancient teachings from India that talk about Maya and Brahman. This idea that appearance is an illusion, or the appearance is hiding the essence. The essence is what's real, it's the spiritual, it's the truly divine, and the appearance is the cover, the veil, that's hiding it. And so we all originate in this world within the appearance reality. So Plato describes this as that allegory of the cave, that we're born more or less chained to our five senses, and all we can discern are the shadows that are cast upon the cave wall, the appearances. And as we looked at last week, as Plato and his mentor Socrates understood philosophy, the love of wisdom is a deep spiritual practice. It's not just sort of staring at your navel and trying to figure things out through just brute thinking. There's a method to cultivate this inner silence and an inner listening and an inner sensitivity that would have you actually ascend through subtler and subtler states of consciousness. In the metaphor or allegory of cave, it would be that one person that was able to unchain himself from the senses and begin that long and arduous ascent towards the mouth of the cave where the sunlight can be found, which is, in Plato's word, the good or the real. Going beyond appearances and back into the light of reality. And this was, for Plato and his ilk, the idea of philosophy, that we would no longer be slaves and beguiled by appearances. And so for Plato, this was really the whole essence and importance of a life that was truly worth living, an examined life, something that you took upon yourself as a personal practice, a personal vow, and a commitment to no longer be entrapped within the lies and the falsehoods of the appearance reality. And so spirituality, like these ancient ideas of philosophy, in the true import of religion, is giving you that same method of deep seeking, inquiry, and piercing the veil of appearances. And so we're going to look at this today in some detail. And so one of the ways that we want to set it up is the idea of going out of the ordinary perception and into the extraordinary perception, from the secular to the sacred. And, they say in Tibetan Buddhism that, you can't really get on the path of Dharma and Dharma practice until you forego the fixation and the making important what they call the 8 worldly concerns. The 8 worldly concerns, pain and pleasure, praise and blame, infamy and fame, and, my goodness, I had it totally down this morning. But praise and blame, infamy and fame, pleasure and pain, and something else. But you can't get into the Dharma practice without all four. So we're all screwed here this morning. Because what happens is we are, in many ways, only fixating on making this life the only life and what the world says is worth living for and the successes of the world's standards. We become complicit and compliant to simply following along with the herd in the ordinary way of thinking. And in order to really know oneself, which is the goal of true religion and true philosophy, you have to begin to question the appearance reality and the ordinary ways of thinking. And this is why I said in the beginning of today's service that this kind of makes it really applicable for our day and age, because unbeknownst to most of us, we have been sliding on a slippery slope, culturally speaking, for a couple of hundred years into more and more materialistic views of life. And religion and philosophy have more or less just become shells or token realities within the overarching truth of scientism and materialism. And so one of the great philosophers in the 20th century and a mythologist by the name of Mircea Eliade wrote a very important book called The Secular, or rather The Profane and the Sacred. And in this book, The Profane and the Sacred, Eliade lays this out. He says, primitive and ancient man had an easier time of regaining the knowledge of the sacred because they knew that they fell from this higher consciousness or divine state. And their life was more or less geared towards a reascension or a reawakening of this lost knowledge. Eliade says modern man, modern human beings, have a much harder time because there's a second fall, that we are suffering from an amnesia of never having been in the sacred. And so the sacred, again, becomes this token reality, and we more or less see religion as a moralism, something to be a good person and be socially active and fight for justice, none of that being unimportant, but in no way does that get you to pierce the veil of appearance and come to know yourself truly beyond the clutches of Maya or illusion. And so in our day and age, we have been held captive not only by a materialistic scientism and a hyper-capitalism, but what Plato often railed against in his day was what's called sophistry. And sophistry is a term that actually related to a group or a school within Plato's time called the Sophists. And the Sophists were infamous in being able to convince you with their use of rhetoric and smooth speech. They were masters at giving you a lie in truth's form and having you believe it. And so in our materialistic day, with our blunted intuition and our inability in many cases to actually contact this inner light of discernment that can see truth versus falsehood, we are often led astray and bought into the sophistry of our current situation. And so we find ourselves oftentimes dividing into left and right. And these divisions within our society are emblematic or reflecting these inner divisions that we have within ourselves. So one of the things that we want to look at here is, how do we gain unity? To know oneself is to know unity. This is a really important thing to get, that your consciousness is the unity of being, because it's the consciousness in all consciousnesses. It's the being in all beings. That's why it's often said, when you know yourself, you will know your Lord. You will know God. Because the same I, the same witnessing awareness, is also in the heart of the divine. We have been exiled from that Edenic state. We fell. We veiled it. We lost awareness of it. We're suffering from amnesia. We don't know ourselves. And so we don't know how to discern reality from appearance because we actually view ourselves as simply an appearance. We're a frontal being. We're a mask. We're a persona. We are not a true individual, as Gurdjieff would say. We're asleep. And so true philosophy, true religion, is going to rouse us. It's going to stir us up. It's going to have us shake off the chains of our sleep and no longer fall prey to the sophistry of those who have hidden agendas couched within their smooth and honeyed words. So really the game that we're up to here on a Sunday morning is to uncover together this jewel that is hidden within you, this ability to cut through all false appearances and see who you really are and thereby reacquaint yourself with the unity of being. What better place to do this than at Unity Church? And this is something that we also mentioned last week, that Unity Church came to be as a part of the movement of New Thought around the late 1800s into the early 20th century was a huge revival in recognizing the power of consciousness and the power of thought as things. The thoughts are powers of creative energy. And so in order to really know oneself, we have to begin to unify in how we think. This is something that's also going to be part of this, that he says it in A Course in Miracles. Jesus says this in A Course in Miracles in light of unifying how one thinks. He says it in a very succinct catchphrase. Teach only love, because that is what you are. In order to know yourself, you have to be an integral being. You have to be integrated. You have to have integrity. But that means that your core must permeate throughout your entire composite being. So your thoughts, your speech, and your actions must all be in unity. So that's why in order to get out of the conflict of our present materialistic age and not fall prey to the sophistry of those with hidden agendas, we have to really commit to being and showing up as who we are, even in the face of no agreement, which could be in our own family units. To make a commitment to be only love, to teach only love. Another way he says it in A Course in Miracles is, in order to have peace, teach peace, to learn it. So in other words, that's giving to others what you need, what you want to receive. And this is the secret key of coming out of the chains and the inner conflicts and actually being a light in our dark age. So we're going to look at some of the ways that this shows up in terms of this cultivating of the inner space, this polishing of the hidden jewel, because it can be very confusing work sometimes. We know that if we have been on this spiritual path for any while, we may have gone through some religious institutions, churches, temples, synagogues, and sometimes we get to a point where we can't stay anymore because we see hypocrisy and falsehood there, even where it's supposed to be a watering hole, an oasis, and we find that it's just as hypocritical and full of corruption as if, we were out in the world. And so this has been a long-term situation in life. As human beings, we see this hypocrisy creeping up in all different faith traditions. And so we want to look at some of those sometimes humorous stories just to illustrate this need to go beyond appearance and hypocrisy. And so one story comes from the Jewish tradition. One of the great mystics, he was actually the father of the Hasidic revival, the Baal Shem Tov. Anybody hear of the Baal Shem Tov? No? His name was actually Israel, but his title was Baal Shem Tov, which means master of the good name. Baal is master, Shem is name, and Tov is good. And there were many different Baal Shem Tovs in that time, because what that meant was they knew the hidden forces of creation. And through the power of names and divine prayers, they could actually affect healing. And so Baal Shem Tov was one of these great healers and mystics. And what made him really noticeable and one of the great luminaries of his time was he saw within the common people the want, the desire, the love of the divine. And oftentimes the most common people were really valued at a low degree by the great Torah scholars and leaders within the Jewish movement. So he tells a story to illustrate this and to reveal the hypocrisy of the religiosity versus the true dedicated spirit. And the name of this story is The Tale of the Sigh and the Sneer. And it starts by saying there was a porter. Now, a porter, if you know, it was a working class position where you would carry baggage all day. You basically would lug heavy luggage and stuff like that for people who can pay for it. It was a service, but it was backbreaking, literally backbreaking work. So this porter would oftentimes get up early in the morning, rush to synagogue, say his prayers, but he didn't know the Hebrew, didn't understand the Hebrew, but fumbled through the prayers, but had such devotion to God, and then would leave and go on his way for another back-breaking day to get a crust of stale bread, is told in the tale, to give to his family, and not be able to not be able to end the day without going back to synagogue and being in the nightly service of prayer. Now, every day he would walk home from synagogue, and he would be walking with or alongside of this student, this person who studied Torah, the sacred scriptures, as a occupation. He had a stipend. He was given this as his career, and so he studied all of the great books. And as the two would walk, not together, but in the same direction, the porter with his hunched back would look over at the Torah scholar and sigh, thinking what a great life that would be to be able to study all day and contemplate the holy truths of Scripture. And the Torah student would look over at the porter and look at his ragged clothes and his hunched back and how he performed the prayers and the service, and would sneer at him as if to say, we have nothing in common. You are not like me. And this went on for days, months, and years until both of them had passed away, says the Baal Shem Tov. And when they went before the heavenly court, the Torah scholar was seen first, and the council there heard his plea of how much he has studied and how great his knowledge, and they were about to let him go into the higher paradise when an angel appeared and stopped the proceedings and had the scale brought out and actually took all of the thick tomes and volumes of sacred books that the student had studied and put it on one side of the scale, and took his sneer and put it on the other side of the scale. And the sneer outweighed the books. The story goes on. The porter is there. He's a man loaded with, sins and didn't have all of the learning that the other had. But his sigh, his desire for God, his intention to be holy, far outweighed everything that he had going against him. So what the Baal Shem Tov was saying here, remember this is for the common people, is that you don't need all of the learning and social status and appearance that would qualify you as somebody of holy standing. It's really an attitude within the heart. It's that important that these inner states of your own intentionality far outweigh the appearance level of what success and trappings of success you may seem to have in this world. Another story comes from the Zen tradition. And this is taken from Zen Antics, this little book here. And this one is called Everyday Religion. One of the great barons of Western Japan went to visit the Zen master Hakuin and asked for some instruction. As it happened, a villager had brought some millet cakes for the Zen master just at the same time. So you have this elitist, somebody who's very high up in society, coming to the Zen master, and at the same time, a peasant offering some millet cakes. Now, the elite individual is asking for instruction. Hakuin immediately took the cakes and offered them to the baron. Accustomed to rich food, the baron had never eaten millet. He could not bring himself to eat of the peasant woman's simple cakes. Observing this, Hakuin scolded the baron, saying, "Force yourself to eat it. You will get to know the misery of the common folk. My teaching is nothing but this." Now it seems simple, and maybe even you got a surface connection to it. But Hakuin was one of the greatest Zen masters in Japan. And what he was saying is, my teaching is basically having you get in the world of other people and see through their eyes and not hold them aloof because of these class distinctions. And this is, again, one of the reasons why I wanted to bring up this conversation, because we are living at a time where some have called it the return of the Gilded Age. There has never been in our generations of recent date such a divide in income inequality and social standing. And we sometimes get into our little bubbles and we forget what it may be like for others. And what Hakuin is saying is, do not shun the appearance of the simple, the less fortunate, etc., because it's by getting into their world that you can begin to see the unity behind the divisions. So everything that I just said can be sophistry. It can just be words to you. What makes it different is the possibility, the slim possibility, of you actually opening the heart and letting these words in. Because there's something behind them, just like with Hakuin. There was something behind what he said. It wasn't just eating the millet cake. The entire Zen, esoteric Buddhist teaching was illustrated in that moment for that individual, just as it's being illustrated in this moment for you. The trouble is we oftentimes have a sense of being aloof by our own reasoning, by our own ways of thinking, that we don't touch that barest essence within us because we have amnesia. And so Plato, to go back to him for a moment, described his method of philosophy as, in the Greek term, anamnesis. And what that meant in translation is the undoing of amnesia. That as you begin to go within and sense these subtler spaces within your heart and understand how we are veiling the light of being, the unity consciousness from ourself in this present moment, we begin to inquire, we begin to get quiet. We begin to breathe in these uncomfortable, constricted spaces within our own heart. We begin to actually face and confront our fear, our bigotry, our prejudice, our racism, our class divide. We begin to touch these places within us. Maybe not within our own individual belief system, but within our family conditioning or within our society. And as we go within and touch these places and feel the uncomfortable feelings that were hidden underneath, we can bring light to these areas. And what's fascinating to see is that when we bring the light to these places within our own heart, that will then shine out into the world, and we will somehow or another view the effects of our own inner changes reflecting to us in the world. As within, so without. So this book is The Opening of the Way. It's written by a woman by the name of Isha Schwaller de Lubitsch. She was the wife of Schwaller de Lubitsch. He was a scientist and a amateur Egyptologist, fascinating individual. He went to Egypt and spent 15 years studying the Temple of Luxor, because within the Egyptian temple building, they contained all of the esoteric teachings of higher knowledge and this ascent back into the light. If you ever want to explore this for yourself and see the work of Schwaller de Lubitsch, which is part of what's called a symbolist tradition, you can go on YouTube and look up the videos called Magical Egypt. I highly recommend them. They're fascinating. Isha de Lubitsch spent the time with her husband and so became highly acquainted with the esoteric teachings of ancient Egypt and saw within them this inner development of the individual that was necessary for us to understand higher consciousness, to know ourselves. It says here when she's talking about the milieu is the environment in which this higher state or higher self can hatch in your awareness, that the right conditions need to be present for you in your life in order for this to begin to show up for you in a real way, not just empty talk, but actual experience. And so she says here, if the fruit, which we're talking here about the awakening of your higher self as the fruit, if the fruit is to be sound, the milieu must be in harmony with the nature of the seed. That's what we were saying earlier. Your thoughts, your speech, and your actions must be in alignment and congruent with what you desire most. If you want your higher self, if you want the peace and joy and love of the divine, if you want to feel this unshakable peace, your thoughts, your speech, and your actions must all become unified and integrated in this milieu. So thus, for the creation of such a milieu in oneself, the first requisite is knowledge of all the deepest tendencies of one's real being. The deepest tendencies of one's real being, going beyond the mask that you call yourself, and these mechanical actions and reactions and conditionings that we've more or less been programmed to robot. It's a deeper looking into what really motivates us, what's really behind our thoughts, our speech, and our action. It's fascinating. It's confronting oftentimes, but you begin to really get intimate with the hidden agendas behind your own thoughts and speech and actions. The second condition is to awaken and re-educate the inner perception. So you first must observe, without judgment, what is really motivating your thoughts, your speech, and your action as you currently are. And then you undergo a re-education, a transformation of your inner perceptions. You begin to purify, enlighten, and shed some of the things that are blocking that higher self-knowledge from coming to you. So you clean out. And then she says the third is to cultivate and intensify the will to the light. So she starts by saying this: if in the revealing light of some moment of cataclysm you were to meet your double, not dressed in its worldly apparel, not armed with that buckler of excuses which conventional hypocrisy uses to cover our secret wishes, but in all its moral nakedness, showing its tendencies and its urges, its pitiless cunning and its cowardice, are you certain that you would recognize yourself? So you see, in order to have this conversation, I had to forego some of the worldly concerns. Because to give this message, hopefully, to lighten the mood here is I'm not looking for praise. I'm not looking for fame. I'm not looking to please people. We're going to see when we get into the story of Ramakrishna how beautifully that's illustrated. I'm simply here to offer what works for me, what has helped me open up as little as I have to something beyond this world, something that is truly divine, and is offered to each and every single one of us in every moment of our breath. But we are overlooking it, turning away from it, veiling it in some way, shape, or form, and then looking upon a bewildered world and conflict and war and lies, and crying out in ourselves on some level, wanting that to change. And in order for that to change, we must become completely real with our hidden selves. Not a popular message. Because what we have at our disposal is an entire culture of victimhood and blame that we can easily turn to instead of looking at the moral nakedness of our hidden selves and our hidden agendas and such. This is not to put a damper on you. It's to reveal your glory to you. Truly. You know, some of the reasons why we may have left organized religions is because of the guilt, or because, you know, they focus a lot on sin and hell and punishment. And we want to feel good. We want to be happy. And so we're not focusing on sin, guilt, and punishment and hell, but we have to look and confront what's veiling our heaven. It is an inner path, the true way, the opening of the way to your own light, which will save the world and you, is to first go and look at what's blocking it. So she says here, how many sages are there on this earth who could and comely would call by their real names the secret motives of their actions? That, nevertheless, would be the greatest victory a person could gain over himself, and the first proof of his mastery, a clear vision of all the tendencies which rule his inner being. And it's hard to do this by yourself. And, you know, for me, God has granted me my beautiful partner, Lisa, who, in her most loving, compassionate, and gentle way, allows me to see some of these hidden tendencies that come up in the relationship dynamics, and shines a major light on that for me and lovingly helps me see this about myself sometimes. And so this is something that oftentimes we can't see for ourselves. They're blind spots. That's why some of the great teachers have said, listen to your enemies. They might be telling you something very valuable about yourself. She says, if you want to enjoy the sympathy of the crowd, if you want normal people to make excuses for you, do not enter the maze to which this fearless search will lead you. It reminds me of the words of Jesus, that broad is the way, and many go in, that leads to the path of destruction. Narrow is the way, and few that find it, that leads to the path of life. This is not a popular message. But if only one would recognize where it leads you to the treasure. It leads you to the blessing. It leads you to paradise. So she says, if you want the crowds and you want people to love you, if you want people to come along and commiserate with you and make excuses for you, don't enter on this path. You will be confronted. So she says, if that's the case, remain in the disguising shade where reassuring mediocrity comes down and veils any truth that should threaten to show its face and to discourage inquiries. Cover it with a well-known label. For quite possibly the unveiling of your secret world might ruffle your calm acceptance of the opinions, values, and prejudices which rule your ordinary life. How we doing? Feeling good? Yes? Just allow your awareness to stay inwardly directed. Witness what occurs in a conversation like this within the eternal state, your internal state. What thoughts come up, where you are in your mind, your feelings, your emotions, your physical posture. You want to bring your awareness, your mindfulness into this conversation because it's designed to stir you up. I wouldn't be worth my salt if I just had you feel good all the time. I'm not here to make you feel bad, but we have to bring the light. And the light can't get in when we have these blind spots within our own self blocking it. So then she says this, for the great mass of human beings, family, country, and religious denomination are an indispensable refuge. But for those who desire to take the narrow way and attain the highest of human possibilities, the gospel has shown the unconditional requirement. If anyone hate not his father and mother and wife and children, he cannot be my disciple. That's Luke 14:26. The word hate does not mean in the gospel of love that fury which poisons modern society, but rather the exclusiveness which gives precedence to the conquest of reality over against all other social duties and relationships. In other words, our commitments to the ordinary life have to be put aside so that our commitment to waking up take precedence. We are not worthy to be the disciple of the Christ mind if we are putting other things in place and priority. That's what's being said here. And then finally from Isha. But if this longing for reality predominates already in you, then follow the commandments of liberation. Let go of all that the past has written in your substance. Seek your true name. Set yourself apart from the group soul of any group and learn that you can serve your fellow travelers more effectively by becoming yourself. A sun that shines with its own light, rather than by helping them to drag the old chains of slavery. So before we get to the final part of our talk with a story from Ramakrishna, we can just see that our spiritual traditions are becoming more and more aligned with this narrow way. The old-time religions have long not satisfied. And we're coming out of the amnesia of materialism and the false promises of progress that modernism had put upon us as a human species. We look along the bleak hellscape of our society and our geopolitical situation and our world at large, and we do not see progress. And so something's got to give. And what it is finding your own personal path, your own narrow way back to the light within your heart, which the pressures of this world can help guide you to meet when you begin to see that the outer world is not to be looked upon for safety and security and hope, and not to be beguiled by the sophistry of the political camps that are only there to feed vested interests and have you hypnotized by their flowery words. You must wake up. You must be free. And the time is now. Ordinary and mediocre is not an option anymore. So this last story comes from an excellent book. If you're ever wanting to have a heart-opening experience, read this, The Great Swan, Meetings with Ramakrishna by Lex Hinkson. And if you don't know anything about Ramakrishna, he lived towards the close of the 20th century. A God-realized saint, considered to be an avatar of the goddess or the divine mother in the form of Kali was his way of worshiping God, from India. And he would often be in what's called divine ecstasy. His mind would become so immersed in the love of God that he would lose consciousness of the physical world of the five senses and go into total absorption. And he would oftentimes have to be carried and put places. And what we're going to be looking at in this story is how India had moved on in their cultural belief. That because of the British occupation, a lot of Indians began to be influenced by the British way of thinking and learning. And so the story of Ramakrishna that we're looking at, he goes to this house of elites, very well-to-do people in the society who really favor materialism and modernism and the trappings of high society. And here comes a disheveled, ragged-looking individual who is also recognized to be a divine guru. And so he's asked if he's going to preach at this gathering. And he says this: "The very word preach is utterly distasteful. It suggests that someone can dispense truth as if it were a commodity rather than the supreme and only reality. It is a chronic human vanity alone that assumes anyone can preach, that anyone can stand in front of an audience or a congregation and present truth. Human egos are flimsy, insignificant structures. They cannot withstand the slightest impact of genuine truth force. Divine reality alone is capable of transmitting truth, and the timeless essence of the soul alone can receive this powerful transmission." Consider carefully. Even if intelligent readers and audiences congratulate you enthusiastically on your eloquent words, they will certainly forget your intended meaning. You will have to write more books and give more lectures to remind them. Afterward, your teaching once more slips from their busy minds. Thus, you become caught in a negative cycle. And when you die, all your work will disappear instantly or gradually. Boiling milk foams up and appears to fill the entire pot, but the moment one removes it from the flame, the level drops way down. You must gradually increase your capacity to bear and transmit truth force. How? Through intensive spiritual practice and commitment. Aligning your thoughts, your speech, and your actions to compassion, love, altruism. Teaching peace in order to learn it. Then he says, to this man of letters and, outward success, you are constantly surrounded, both physically and psychically, by the habitual egocentric tendencies called lust and greed. This is a poisonous atmosphere. You regard women not as sacred vessels of the goddess, but as objects for momentary satisfaction. Wealth is regarded not as Divine Mother's abundance, mercifully granted for the welfare of all her beloved created beings, but as a means to grasp power and to satisfy every obsession imaginable. Your mouth has become a machine that speaks about lust and greed, and automatically your surface mind, he's saying to this individual, may soar into impressive intellectual spaces, but your mind's eye is fixated like the sharp gaze of the high-flying vulture, solely upon dead or dying flesh. This is not really you who speak in such obsessive patterns, but a mind that has unconsciously permitted itself to become calculating, turbulent, and deceitful. He's saying this in the midst of a gathering of high society. He's not concerned with the 8 worldly concerns of praise and blame and fame and infamy. He's just speaking the truth. He's telling the guest of honor, a man who's celebrated by the masses and considered a holy scholar, what the true state of his inner life is. This very same mind can become serene, guileless, and innocent by concentrating on divine reality. A mind that has directly perceived truth, even for an instant, would never jest as you have done. You have revealed the impoverished condition of your awareness. What purpose can broad scholarship, brilliance of expression, and commitment to social reform really serve if there is no sound discrimination between what is exalted and what is merely conventional or habitual? Sophisticated modern people remark about the lovers of God. They're poor, misguided. All they care about is divine love. We enjoy philosophy and religion as well, they say. Anyway, enough of that. But the point here is, after he reveals the individual for who he truly is, instead of taking offense, the man actually becomes humbled and comes closer to the master. And the master goes into divine ecstasy. And the man is just standing there, dumbfounded by what has been transmitted to him and what is now at work within his inner space. Something took root. His heart opened. The hard truth cracked the outer shell so that he could find what he really wants. Because all of what he's currently occupied with is going to pass away. So this is kind of where we come to the end of our journey this morning. All of this is going to pass away. Your body, your life, your legacy, whatever it is you value, all your possessions are all a fleeting matter. What is the abiding factor? What is the one constant truth? The unity at the heart of your being. If left undiscovered, if your life is not examined, as Plato would say, it was a life not worth living. Examine yourselves. Confront yourselves. And remember, I'm only saying this because it's just what I'm doing at the best level that I can. I fail often. I am not preaching. But this seems to be the way of peace, the way of truth, the way of abundance. Because everything else will pass away. So on that note, the blue bag's going to go around, and you can put your temporary money in the temporary bag. And the church is grateful. If you're joining us from Facebook land, you can click the link and go to the donation page. Just make sure you put 8 a.m. for the service donation. So Joe has a microphone. If anybody has anything they want to say, just put your hand up. Annie? You're welcome. We'll bless the offering. We just acknowledge the gift and charge it with our intention that it bring light and true healing to this world. And so it is. Amen. Well, my friends, it's come to the top of the hour. We're going to have to stand and close out with the unity prayer. Finding this place of peace within the heart. Having the will to reveal the light. We invoke the prayer knowing that the light of God surrounds us. The love of God enfolds us. The power of God the The light of God surrounds us, the power of God protects us, and the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is. Amen. Thank you, my friends. Have a beautiful day. We'll see you again.